Hello, everyone. Thank you for your patience. My name is Emmeline Cheney. I'm the Program Management Officer on Forest and Climate Change at the United Nations Environment Programme. And I'll be your moderator for this exciting session on forest-water connections to achieve the Sustainable Development Goals. I'd like to start welcoming you on behalf of the organizers, C4ICRAF, Stockholm International Water Institute, UNEP, and FAO. But also on behalf of the Forest and Water Champions. The Forest and Water Champions are a group of experts that have existed since 2017 to demonstrate the linkages between water and forest and the role that they play together in securing resilient landscapes. Water security is key to achieving the Sustainable Development Goals. Yet the world is facing increasing water shortages. An estimated 4 billion people do not have sufficient access to safe and reliable water. And while the link between forest and climate change is regularly considered in decision-making, including this Congress, the role that the connection between forest and water plays remains very much underrepresented, under-discussed. And this is why we organize this session today. It's the first time that the Forest and Water Champions are hosting an event at the World Forestry Congress, actually. And I'm honored that they have entrusted me to moderate this session. And the objective, we hope, is to sensitize the forest sector on how important the forest-water nexus is to achieve the targets of the Agenda 2030, and also inspire participants of all backgrounds to take action to improve the integration of water in forest management at all levels of government. So we'll be together for 90 minutes, or maybe a bit less because we're running late. And we have a great and very interactive program, quite packed with inspirational presentations and the presentations and the speakers, you'll see, they will essentially follow the flow of water. So we'll be traveling from mountains to plains to watersheds to urban areas and coastlines and back through flying rivers. So before we start, we'd like to do a short interactive exercise to get a sense of who is with us, either here in the room or online joining. So if you can get your computers or phones and get onto Mentimeter, so it's www.menti.com, MENTI.com. I'm hoping you're going to see soon on screen a code that you can enter to menti.com in order to access 2 simple questions. So can we see the screen with the code, please? When we do, you'll see 2 simple questions. Where are you from and what type of organizations do you represent? This is our exercise for this collective discussion to get a sense of who is joining the discussion. Okay, apologies. It seems we're running. I think we're having some technical difficulties, so perhaps I will move on. Anyway, you've been very patient with us, so I feel like we should get going. But there are 2 persons that I'd like to introduce as well, 2 knowledgeable experts and forest water champions who have played a big part in designing and organizing this event. Malin Lundberg Ingemarsen. Oh, okay. Oh, sorry. Apologize. I see we now have the Mentimeter. Thank you so much. So you see the code at the very top? 19470823 that you can enter. I think those joining us online are already in the Mentimeter, but those in the room, I'd like to also get a sense. So we have, let me see. I can't see so well. Maybe I can see on my screen. Yeah. So we have quite a few foresters, obviously, scientists. Okay, international organizations well represented. but some local national decision makers, I'm glad, because you are very important to the call for action we're trying to make with this event. Can we have a look at the other question, please? Where is our audience from? All right, so we're quite spread out. Some people from obviously quite a few people from Asia. I see one person from Africa just connected. Welcome. Brazil, quite a few people in Europe, of course, and some people in Korea. More and more people joining, I'm glad, including some from America, where it's very late or early in the morning, so thank you for joining. Actually, in fact, this timing is not necessarily great for all the time zones, so we'll be recording the session and uploading it on YouTube for those who missed out. All right, so thank you very much. Please stay connected to the Mentimeter. We'll be using it for the Q&A later on, so stay in there. But I would like to introduce two, as I said, two experts and Forest Water Champion members who have essentially designed and organized the event, but cannot be here today in Seoul. So this is Malin Lundberg Ingemarsen, the landscape climate expert at the Stockholm International Water Institute, and Sarah Casayas, forest and water expert at FAO. They are online, they're on Zoom, so perhaps I'd like to give them the opportunity to say a few words before we start properly. Can we connect with Malin and Sarah, please?
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you and see you. Hello, Malin.
Lovely. Hi, Emmeline. Hello, everyone. Greetings from Sweden and Stockholm International Water Institute. I am so happy to be joining, and I am very much looking forward to this very interesting session. Sarah, please.
Thank you, Malin.
Hi, everyone. It is a pleasure to be here today. Welcome, and we hope you have a fantastic session. And hi from Colombia. I'm also part of the FAO Forest Resilience team, so welcome and thank you for being here today. Over to you, Emily.
Thank you. So, as I said, please stay connected on the Mentimeter. Using the same code, you should be able to see a slide giving you the opportunity to ask questions during the session. It will remain open for most of the session, so you can register your questions and your comments, and which are very important to us. We may not have time to answer them live today, but we will be collecting them and actually asking our experts who are joining today to answer them, and then we'll publish the questions and the answers on the FAO Forest Water Champions website. So I just would like to ask you to remember to write your name and affiliation, as well as the name of the person you are directing the questions to in your comment on menti.com. All right, so with this, I would like to introduce our first speaker, Dr. Amy Duchel, who will give some welcoming remarks and highlight just how important it is to address water at the World Forestry Congress. Amy is a senior forestry officer and team leader on forest and climate change at the Food and Agriculture Organization, and she was previously working for CIFOR in Indonesia. Amy, please.
Great. Thank you, Emmeline, and thank you to the colleagues who organized this really important event. FAO is proud to play an active role in the Forests and Water Champions group and to help promote this critical agenda globally. So forests and trees and their interrelationship with water are vital to achieving the Sustainable Development Goals. Forests and trees are an integral part of the water cycle, and their importance for our water supply cannot be underestimated. In fact, 75% of our renewable water supply comes from forest and water ecosystems. In the Nature-Based Solutions sub-theme opening yesterday, we had a really wonderful keynote from Professor Deborah Lawrence at the University of Virginia, who's doing some cutting-edge science on the relationship between forests, water, and climate. And forests regulate the climate by moving water. And the process of evaporation, it not only cools the forest itself, but it cools entire regions. And so keeping our global temperatures below 1.5 degrees Celsius also depend on these processes. And of course, forests regulate rainfall. In deforested areas, rainfall can decline 10 to 15%. And forest loss not only affects the immediate regions, but it affects rainfall globally, and we're going to hear more about that today. There are forest climate benefits beyond these mitigation benefits of cooling and everything else, and really providing local adaptation and resilience benefits that cannot be underestimated. But of course, you know, water and forests, it's not only for climate action and SDG 13, but forests and water issues cut across the Sustainable Development Goals. And at least 8 of the goals require an increasing supply of clean, secure, and reliable water. And many of the others enable this to happen, while more of the development goals related to education, peace, and justice are also connected to water issues. So given the importance of the forest and water nexus to achieving the Sustainable Development Goals, we need to start thinking about this as a bigger system, what we're calling the forest, water, climate, people system. And so ensuring that the sustainable management of forests for the provision of water-related ecosystem services and also for people's livelihoods. So we need to be bringing this water lens to the focus of all of our discussions about forests and manage our forests through a water lens. And fortunately, managing forests to provide healthy water functions doesn't need new management tools. There's really already a lot in place, and FAO published a guide to forest water management last year that reviews many of the techniques and methods that have been around for a long time and those that are more recent. And what we need now is to really apply these tools through a lens that considers the multiple functionality of forested ecosystems and the locations of those ecosystems in the landscape and other management techniques. So we're in a really important moment, as we've heard throughout the conference. You know, we have the COP26, the finalization of the Paris Agreement rules. We have the UNCCD COP very soon. We have the post-2020 biodiversity framework. We're really at a moment of many things coming together and ensuring that water is at the forefront of all of this. We also have the UN Decade on Ecosystem Restoration that is being led by FAO and UNEP, and this really provides a wonderful platform to work together to prevent further degradation of ecosystems and initiate their restoration to enhance people's livelihoods, counteract climate change, and halt the loss of biodiversity, and ensuring that water issues, forests, water, climate, people issues are at the center of the decade. We also need to bring this conversation across sectors and policy frameworks and initiatives like today, where we're really going with this subtheme of the World Forest Congress on Forests Without Boundaries and discussing the forest, water, climate, and people interactions. So thank you again to the organizers. I'm looking forward to the presentations. I hope that all of you will enjoy them too, and that they will help stimulate discussions on how to further enhance forest management and governance for the provision of water for people and for the planet. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Amy, for giving us such a clear sense of the global challenge ahead of us. Amy will stay with us and join a panel discussion later, but next is our keynote speaker, Dr. Mine van Noordwijk, who is a distinguished senior fellow at the Center for International Forestry Research and World Agroforestry, and is also a professor emeritus in agroforestry at Wageningen University.
Yes, thank you. I hope we can get the slides on the screen.
So we can hear you, but okay, yes. This is you, and
you can try to share mine if you would like to.
Okay, then that's easier.
okay, we can now see you, yes.
Sorry, oops. Yes, so thank you. The organizer asked me to talk about how managing forest for water connects to all SDGs. And the simple answer is it takes 3 steps. We need to understand water. And in the Mentimeter, we saw that we don't have farmers and water managers in the room. But we do need our understanding the processes between climate, forest, water, people. We need to link that to our social ecological systems, where we talk about functions, services, benefits, value, feedback, and actors. And we need to connect that with the language of governance, where we talk about issues and goals, and we have action linked to knowledge, and it is about context and options. So these 3 steps, if we connect them better, then we may be able to achieve our goal. We are in this setting of a puzzle where we have problems about floods, problems about fires and drought, and problems about losing infrastructure, people with landslides, whatever. And we talk about rules, roles, drivers, conflict. How can we put the pieces of this puzzle together? Now, forest, water, people, it's clear in this Congress that people are very diverse. And even if you look in the room, it's clear that forest is a very diverse entity. And water seems to be simple. There's only water and we need more of it. Actually, there is plenty of water on the planet, but most of it is deep in underground, in the ocean and other parts. And when we bring in the complexity of the mountain to ocean range of how water flows, we see many different issues arriving within the water, and yet they are all connected through this cycle. Now, a few years ago in IUFRO, when we assessed the whole forest water part, we found there's different paradigms. There's the perspective that the more trees, the better, and the water security of everyone increases if we have more tree cover. There is the opposite perspective that planting trees costs water and that we have less water in the rivers if we plant more trees. And we have a view that it depends on where we are on the globe. There are many things intermediate possible, and maybe intermediate tree densities may be optimal in terms of water security. How is that? Yeah, and the details are in this part. So the first paradigm, we call it the paradise lost, thinks that everything is fine with water if the forests are okay. All problems start with deforestation, and tree planting is the universal remedy. Now, 20 years ago or a bit more, it started with the eucalyptus debate that fast-growing trees use more water, and we moved to the blue versus green water competition, that green water used by trees is at the cost of blue water that would be in the rivers. And most water managers in the world will be convinced of this paradigm on the technical side. Now, we can reconcile that with the full hydrological cycle paradigm, that water used by trees is not lost from the planet, but can come back as rainfall somewhere else. But also that's not about forest, non-forest. It is about leaf area index, root properties, surface seeding. It matters what type of tree cover it is and where and how it is managed. So in the new paradigm, it matters more where we are on the globe, and we don't have universal truth. We need to start with assessing the situation in the landscape we actually talk about. So yes, we start with deal with different subsystems. We have the climate vegetation interface where rainfall comes in. Some evaporates quickly because it was intercepted in the canopy. Overall, 7-8 days of a residence time of water molecules in the atmosphere. So there is a short cycle as well as a long cycle involving the oceans. And we have stomata that link the transpiration to the capture of carbon dioxide and productivity. Now that's part within that, we say it depends on what type of trees they are, how they interact, even how they interact with rainfall, and how their canopy is organized. The second level is the soil plant atmosphere continuum, where the part of the rainfall that infiltrates into the soil can be used over the next days, weeks, sometimes months for maintaining evapotranspiration, so the vegetation buffers the water availability, but part of the water becomes overland flow, and there are multiple pathways towards the rivers. Again, it depends on not forest, non-forest, but it depends on leaf area index, root system, interaction with soil, in interaction with rainfall. Now, at the level of water managers, they see water coming in, either overland flow or groundwater, and we talk about using that water for agriculture, for transport, for hydropower, drinking water. And by this time, the people working here, they may have little idea about what happened before. And yet the overall system leads to many different types of benefits for people and links to many different types of SDGs, as we already heard from Amy. And there are many different metrics that help us to see, are we actually achieving functions or not? And that leads to the sort of complexity at the eco-hydrological level. Now, that then links us back to indeed the full cycle of SDGs. We talk about food, we talk about human health, we talk about water supply, energy, jobs, economic activity, safe cities, jobs, climate change, the biodiversity on land and water, and importantly, the rights and governance, and especially when we deal with landscapes, with forests and other people in that landscape. So our steps towards sustainable development is linking the social to the ecological axis. And then when we had the pieces of the puzzle before, we can see them come together. And we can start at the symptoms, the things that go wrong with too much water, not enough water. We can look at the branch structure of the loss of hydroecological buffer in landscapes that leads to land use, land misuse, leads to conflicts. We can go to the root causes in terms of the roles and the rules for people and the drivers of change. And it is only when we get this complete picture together that we can start to understand. Now, in some work we currently do from Wageningen University, we are translating this structure into games, serious games. We can play with people in the landscape, for people at the governance level, and we try to visualize what actually happened with groundwater and how it links to decisions. And we find it's quite remarkable how visualizing these things can spark discussions, can get people engaged in what might happen. And we think that could be a step towards the bigger solution. At the policy level, yes, we need to start with a shared understanding what's actually going on. We need to reconcile these different paradigms. We need a commitment to agreed goals. And yes, we have the 17 SDGs, but when it comes to the means of implementation, that's where things go missing, where we have every sector funding its own goal, and we need to co-invest across to get multifunctionality. And at the MRV, at the monitoring level, the devil is really in the details, and we need a better set of metrics to manage the part. The current water footprint, for example, there are some serious problems with that we recently published about. So some pointers to recent publications that can help you further, but let me stop here and say there are these 3 steps that are needed to link forest, water, and people to the SDGs. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mine, for setting the scene and also highlighting these 3 steps. To reflect on these remarks, we'll now present some case studies focusing on solutions coming from different continents and ecosystems. Again, I'd like to invite you to send your comments and questions to the speakers, including Amy and Mine, through the Mentimeter. They will all be answered in written form after the event. So, we will start our journey in the mountains, and I would like to invite Mr. Basanta Shreta, Director Strategic Cooperation for the International Center for Integrated Mountain Development, ICIMOD. Malin, would you please connect us to Basanta?
Greetings from ICIMOD. Can you hear me well?
Greetings. We can hear you and see you. Please.
Yeah.
Feel free to start.
I guess somebody will load my PowerPoint. Is that correct? Yeah, I see that. Thank you. It's my delight to be present in a virtual mode in this August forum, and greetings from ICIMOD, Kathmandu, Nepal. Let me bring a perspective from the Himalayan region on a forest water people nexus, as our keynote speaker has highlighted. Perhaps very practical tools on spring set management. In the mountains underscores gravity of an issue with isolated mountain communities for water access that impinges their lives and livelihoods. Spring set management at ICIMOD we see from the two SDG lenses, one from climate resilience point of view, SDG 13, and also water security for the mountain communities from SDG Goal 6 point of view. Next slide, please. This is a satellite imagery view from the space of the Hindu Kush Himalayan region. It is estimated that 60 to 80% of people living in the mountains depend upon the springs water in terms of their domestic use, in terms of irrigation, in terms of drinking, and also it underscores cultural and ecological importance, not to mention their whole contribution on the environmental flow. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. Yeah. Now we hear the rampant kind of a news with the accelerating global warming and the climate change. Springs are not only in Nepal, but many countries in the Hindu Kush Himalayan region. The one on the satellite image that you see is one of our practical interventions in one of the municipality in the suburb of Kathmandu Valley. And it's reported that out of 50 springs, 20 springs have dried up, and we have made some intervention in terms of revival of the springs. Next slide, please. As you may know, spring set, it's a system of different water sets and aquifers, but there are important sources in terms of recharging continual flow of water. And the forest plays a very, very important role and underscores the importance of a forest and the spring set in the hills and the mountains and high mountains region of the Hindu Kush Himalayan region. Next slide, please. Now, ICIMOD has developed a 6-step methodology. Maybe you can hit another press button so that you can see the another animation here. We have published a handbook, and we have implemented these programs in a pilot basis in Bhutan, in India, in Nepal, and also it's a very, very success story in terms of the practical tools, in terms of revival of water sources to our mountain communities. And it has a 6-step methodology, which I will just briefly describe in the interest of time. One is the mapping whole issue of a biophysical, eco-hydrology, and also the socio-economic characteristics of a spring set, looking at more inventory type of thing. A second also is more from some of the digital innovation that we have looked at, some of the wireless sensors in terms of data monitoring so that it can provide the informed decision making. And also the third step is really a crux here, and also the people dimension here, understanding social and the governance system. That is very, very crucial for make or break in terms of revival of springs. Fourth step is the identification of a recharge area. Now, given the kind of a spring set, given the kind of a different eco-hydrology, there are different means and measures in terms of nature-based solutions. Fifth step is the implementation of recharge measures, as well as some of the governance protocol that we set up in terms of looking at whole governance issue of water use. Sixth step is more kind of a monitoring impact and also providing the continuous kind of a feedback loop so that it can continuous basis that the springs and the communities, they can work together, they can protect the forest, and they can have access to the clean water. At the same time, there are also benefits in terms of the climate resilience, building adaptation means. Next slide, please. Now, yeah, in terms of recharge measures, I'll just briefly touch base. There are various nature-based solutions, and we have adapted some of these solutions. These are could be a structural green measures. This could be a vegetative or agronomic kind, or it could be a simple kind of a management practices that the community wants it, and community is in charge of managing these spring sets and revival and their whole governance and governance issue. Next slide, please. Next slide is more again, also would like to emphasize and also underscore the value of a social governance measures, and unless we get these things right, unless this is owned by the community, this program doesn't make a success, at least with our test cases in Bhutan, India, and Nepal exemplifies. Just the last slide of the key message that I would like to highlight in this August forum. One is, next slide, please. Yeah, one is water scarcity, and water in the mountains is one of the key resources. It's like a gold, you know, and it exacerbated by the climate change and others, and access to water is a very, very fundamental thing for the mountain communities, of treasury, in terms of their livelihoods, and also the environmental flow. Landscape restoration, we are employing at the landscape level in terms of instead management, and some of the low-cost intervention and the nature-based solutions to have a really scaling up efforts, you know, in the mountains in terms of best practices. So also Nexus approach, as highlighted by our keynote speaker and also the earlier speaker, and I think we need to promote this Nexus in the mountain, and also the, you know, interconnected with lowland. Digital innovation, again, plays a very, very critical role in terms of mapping, in terms of monitoring, in terms of making informed decision making. My last point would be, this is a year of an international year of sustainable mountain development. FAO is leading the process with the Mountain Partnership and many other organizations. I think that also underscores the importance of a UN decade of ecosystem restoration. So these are the simple messages that we would like to bring from the mountains to ensure water security and also building the resilience of the mountain communities. Thank you very much for this opportunity. Perhaps you can get more from the ICIMOD website in terms of this handbook and many best practices on the spring set management. Thank you for this opportunity. Back to you, Mali.
Thank you so much, and thank you for reminding us that this is the year of sustainable mountain development. Thank you. We're now heading to the plains of Ethiopia with Dr. Wolde Mekuria, Senior Researcher at the International Water Management Institute. So we're going online again. Please, Malin, can you please connect us to Dr. Mekuria? Welcome. We can see you and hear you.
Okay, great. This presentation focuses on how the changes in forest cover in the Central Rift Valley, Ethiopia, just related with hydrological flows and water-related ecosystem services. Next slide, please. So just to start with providing some kind of context, as already noted by the keynote speakers, and the influence of forest cover in the landscape on hydrological flows and water ecosystem service varies across areas and forest types. And for example, if you think of forest established through natural regeneration, the casing exclosures, the kind
Sorry
of...
to interrupt. There is a noise in the background. Maybe you could speak a bit closer to the microphone so we can all enjoy your intervention as it should.
Maybe I can close the camera. And how about now?
No, we can still hear the noise. Okay, please go ahead. I think it's close to your microphone.
Yeah, I am close. So if you think of a forest established through natural regeneration, for example, exclosures, the one we see in the right side, in the pictures in the right side, these are more important for reducing water erosion, extend dry season river flows, and reduce flood and improve groundwater. But if you think of kind of forest plantation of fast-growing tree species, this may reduce water availability for human consumption or other uses. So the key thing here is that the link between forest, hydrological flows, and water ecosystem services context specific. Next slide, please. So all here and the information in this slide give you an idea of how tree cover relate with erosion risk, basin water stress, and also precipitation on terrestrial surfaces. In general, as generally speaking, if there is an increase in the loss of tree cover in a landscape, there is an increase in erosion risk, and at the same time, there is an increase in basin water stress, and at the same time, there will be a reduction in precipitation on terrestrial surface when there is an increase in the loss of forest cover or tree cover in a landscape. So in general, these all things show us the importance of forest or the importance of trees in a landscape, but the influence on hydrological flows and also water-related ecosystem services usually context-specific and area-specific and also related to the type of forest and management. Next slide, please. So when you come to the specific Central Rift Valley, which is part of the Great African Rift Valley of Ethiopia, we just analyzed the land cover change over 47 years. That's from 1973 to 2020. And what we have observed was that the loss of forest cover over the analyzed forest surface was significant. And this was related to the expansion of farmland, which actually related with or attributed to the growing pressure on land from increasing population and livestock in the basin or in the entire Central Rift Valley. So the change in forest cover, particularly the decrease in forest cover in the analyzed for 7 years, was very significant and considerable, and this has also implications on hydrological flows and water ecosystem services. Please, next slide, please. So from all these changes, what we have learned is 3 important things we have learned from our analysis. And the first thing is, as you can see from figure 3, the total ecosystem service values have been considerably reduced. And the greatest loss was related to water supply and also hydrological flows, just reflected in figure 4. And the major contributor to this change is the loss of forest cover in the basin. The contribution of the loss of forest cover on the loss of water-related ecosystem services and also hydrological flows was very considerable, and the major contributor to this critical changes or negative consequences is mainly attributed to from the loss of forest cover in the basin. Next slide, please. On the other side, there was an attempt on the eastern escarpment of the Central Rift Valley. We just did some kind of modeling exercise on 15 locations in the Valley ecoregion on the eastern escarpment of the Central Rift Valley. And what we observed is that landscape restoration or ecosystem rehabilitation through different sustainable land management practices have contribution to regulating different kind of hydrological flows. So restored ecosystems usually provide a better ecosystem service and also helps to diversify the livelihood of local communities. For example, restored ecosystems or restored landscapes help us to reduce sediment yield up to 83%, and reduction on runoff up to 58% reduction on runoff, and also up to 9% increase in water yield or water availability in a given landscape or just in the eastern escarpment of the Ethiopian Central Rift Valley. Next slide, please. So this is just a summary of the last slide, and what we have generally just point out, or our exercise or study suggests that the total ecosystem service values have been considerably reduced and due mainly to the loss of forest cover. The greatest loss was related to water supply and hydrological flows, and restoration of degraded landscapes through forestation and establishment of exclosures is very crucial. So using different policy incentives for landscape management, such as a payment for ecosystem service and also integration of income generating activities within land management practice could help improve water ecosystem service through sustaining restoration effort. So such approach also helps to bring the gap between landscape restoration and ecosystem service in the long term, and also local economic losses in the short term, because many restoration efforts or ecological or any sustainable land management practices provide some benefits to farmers after 5, 10, or 15 years, but the farmers also need benefits at the moment because they are mostly poor. So they have to live today to restore their ecosystem, so that this kind of approach helps us to bring the gap between the long-term environmental goals with the short-term economic benefits of local communities. So this will contribute to the achievement of national SDGs targets related to food and water security, for example, SDG 2 and 6, and life on land as an example, for example, SDG 15. Thanks a lot. Back to you, man.
Many thanks for joining us. Next, our journey is taking us to the Panama Canal, where Dr. Jefferson Hall, who is lead scientist at the Smithsonian Tropical Research Institute, and his team have recorded a video for us. Let's watch it, please. Oh, hello. Hi, Dr. Hall. I believe you're here. We were hoping to watch the video that you prepared for us. Do you have...
Yes, please go ahead. Hello from Panama, and thank you so much for having us. Thanks.
Yeah, I think I expect it's a bit more interesting than your office, but...
Oh, wait a minute. My white wall? You don't like that?
Hoy en día, la mitad de todos los bosques tropicales del
Today, the whole of all tropical forests in the world are secondary forests, growing on land that was once logged or used for cattle pasture. In the past, most degraded land was left to regenerate on its own or was planted with non-native teak, pine, or eucalyptus. But as human populations skyrocket, tropical forest becomes ever more important. At the Smithsonian Tropical Research Institute in Panama, scientists and students from around the world are learning from nature how to create a more sustainable future. Our Agua Salad experiment shows us how smart reforestation can mitigate climate change, water supplies, and protect biodiversity. In the largest tropical reforestation experiment of its kind, we planted 150,000 trees and protected degraded lands in a 3 square mile area in the Panama Canal watershed. Carbon. The trees are growing remarkably quickly, demonstrating nature's own resilience in the face of climate change. In poor soils, we've planted native hardwood species that grow larger and store more carbon than the non-native teak, helping mitigate climate change and also providing a better investment option for rural landowners. Water. To better understand how land use management affects water supplies, we compared the amount of water in streams draining cattle pasture with the amount of water in streams draining forest land. Water flows quickly over the packed soils of cattle pastures and it's lost. We've confirmed that forested soils act as a sponge, reducing flooding during major storms and providing water during dry periods. Biodiversity. We're learning from nature that if we grow new forests on degraded lands, the trees attract birds and mammals that help to spread seeds and pollinate flowers, bringing new life to once barren landscapes. This research, pioneered in Panama, is leading to smarter land use planning, thus providing security and hope to people around the world.
Great. Thank you so much. Dr. Hall, since you are with us, would you like to say a few words to complement the video?
Well, if there's time, I mean, thank you so much for letting us have it. the opportunity to be here. We have a large-scale project understanding ecosystem services and understanding hydrological function from mature forests to all sorts of reforested watersheds on through to looking at cattle pastures. So check out our research if anybody has a chance. Thanks.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. And anyway, please stay with us because you're joining a panel a bit later. So we'll hear from Dr. Hall again. But our next case study is from the city of San Salvador. It is my pleasure to introduce you to Leila Zelaya Alegria, who is a national coordinator of the City ADAPT project at UNEP.
Hi, greetings from El Salvador. Would you please upload my presentation? Oh, yes. Okay. Next, please. The City ADAPT project, led by UNEP, with financing from the CHEF, together with the Ministry of Environment and Natural Resources of El Salvador, promotes climate resilience in urban areas through the development of pilot interventions of ecosystems-based adaptation at different territorial scales, at the watershed level, at the landscape level, and at the local level. The intervention zone is the Arenal Montserrat micro watershed in the metropolitan area of San Salvador, capital of El Salvador, a site with frequent flooding due to rapid urbanization with limited urban planning. Among the interventions developed are the restoration of coffee plantations and urban streams, water harvesting systems, absorption wells, and urban gardens. Next, please. I would like to present some of the impacts of one of the measures, coffee plantation restoration and riparian forest restoration. These are data from 2020. 451 hectares of coffee plantations have been restored, planted 46,050 coffee trees and 8,479 fruit trees and native species, 39,167 linear meters of infiltration dishes, and 6 absorption wells. Next, please. Oops. Yeah. Oh. Before, please. Yeah, thank you. Oops. Well, okay. That gives us the impact that we want to tell us. It is that a potential water infiltration of 284,984 cubic meters in 1 year, 148 registered rainy days, and an average soil humidity of 34% in the coffee plantations. In other words, it is water that stops running and causes flooding and now is used by the ecosystem. Please note that these are pilot interventions that we intend to upscale or replicate in another sites and ecosystems. Please, next. About lessons learned, increase the spatial planning framework to design development plans, considering the basin or watershed where the cities are located. Include local actors. EPA interventions must be selected, designed, and implemented with local actors, especially the most vulnerable to climate change. Include local and traditional knowledge about native species and agriculture practices. and gather evidence and data that are easily communicated to other actors to spread the benefits of EBA interventions. Next, please. Barriers that we have found: the existing gap between genders and ages for the identification of ecosystem services provided by urban forests is evident. The answers provided by women and young people to ecosystem services are very varied compared to that of adult men. And it takes time to measure the benefits that EBA interventions produce. So it is convenient to define measurable impact indicators in short term. Thank you very much. Please, the last one.
Gracias,
Yes.
thank you. Thank you so much. We're now reaching the coastline, and we'll be going to the Gambia with our next speaker. Dr. Malanding Jaite, Project Manager of the Large-Scale Ecosystem-Based Adaptation Project in the Gambia. Please.
Hello. Greetings from the Gambia.
Greetings, we can see you, thank you.
Thank you very much for the invitation and the opportunity. As those who are familiar with the Gambia, we are at the bottom of the mountain coast continuum. And also the Gambia has some other attributes that really makes it a little bit complicated, in that the country is low-lying, right south of the bordering really the Sahara, as well as connected by a very low-lying river that is connected to the sea directly. And since the country sits on the banks of the river, it has really made it particularly vulnerable. Those combinations really definitely are the backdrop to this, this presentation. And one of the major climate implications is that the Gambia over the last many years have suffered gradual decline in moisture. So this particular slide, for instance, that was prepared, in fact, the work was done by ICRAF, World Agroforestry, in that it looks at the soil moisture availability for tree growth. And we realized that the continuum really is the further west you go, the more water you have, but it's not that much either, because as you go inland, you realize that there are some areas that don't have good moisture available for tree growth for more than 1/3 of the year, which in a way is essentially saying that trees sit around for more than 8 months without adequate water for growth. And this is really the situation where the ecosystem-based adaptation project has been designed in order to really address some of the big impacts of this climate scenario. So the ecosystem-based adaptation project, which I manage now, is funded by GCF and also supported by UNEP with technical assistance from ICRAF as well as agroforestry. So when the study started, we looked at the moisture gradient. Next slide, please. And also the temperature implications of climate change that the Gambia face. Currently, if we look at the slide, the top 3 are actually the southwest corner of the country, and all other districts, as you move along, you realize that almost everywhere, future climate predicts that we will have significant increase in temperature. And that also means the drying conditions will be no better than now. And of course, that has some implications in terms of what species we can do or grow, and also what kind of nature-based solutions we can employ. Next slide, please. Okay, so EBA project, when it is conceived, is designed to provide at least to restore some 12,800 degraded forests, primarily community forests, areas that are declared by communities to be protected areas, as well as areas that have been degraded through salt intrusion and other things, especially in the swamp areas. We're also looking at restoring degraded agricultural lands. These are farmlands that have been overused and totally devegetated in many ways, and we're trying to find ways of increasing tree cover. As also another component of the project, in order to diversify income and livelihoods, the project is aimed at least establishing 120 natural resource-based enterprises that will primarily improve livelihoods without further degrading the ecosystems. And of course, the third part is the capacity building, which the Gambia being one of the poorest countries, and in terms of one of the Human Development Index, one of the lowest, do suffer quite a great deal in terms of the ability and the capacity to really adapt to these situations. Next slide, please. All right, so to begin with, the restoration aspect of the project, we realized that very quickly that we need to set up infrastructure to produce seedlings in order to really be able to meet the demand, since we say large scale, the demand is pretty high in terms of seedlings. And that resulted in the development of 9 nurseries that are capable of producing at least 1 million seedlings every year. And also, we started working with farmers. Through many consultative process, we end up identifying at least 1,000 farmers, smallholder farms, where based on their preferences as well as some ecological assessment, we're able to identify 3 species that can grow and provide them what they need without actually further degrading their ability as farmers to produce other crops and have other livelihoods. So crops like mango, cashew, and many other species, even indigenous species, have been planted. And another big area, of course, of
apologies to interrupt. Sorry to interrupt. May I ask you to please conclude your conclusion in the next 30 seconds?
Yeah. All right. So in addition to that, biggest challenges we have, of course, is the issue of livestock grazing, farmlands, and as well as fires that actually comes in regularly in terms of any restored area, fire prone, as well as the total dependence on firewood and charcoal by a very growing population. So those are really 3 major areas that are making any restoration activity as well as other EBA works very difficult and challenging at our level.
Thank you very much. Thank you so much. So our final case study is about flying rivers. I'll let those who are not familiar with the concept discover it from our next speaker, Douglas Shield, who is an ecologist, forester, conservationist, and professor at Wageningen University. Douglas has pre-recorded his intervention, but he's here. Welcome, Professor Shield. Would you like to say a few words before we hear your presentation?
Thanks very much. Do you hear me?
Yes, yes.
I think just go ahead and you can save some time. Thank you. I've got everything on the video.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Looking forward to it. So we do not have the sound.
And here you see a recent image, a composite of satellite data showing moisture flowing in across the Atlantic and into the Amazon basin. So flowing in where the Amazon River itself is flowing out. And this is the flow, the atmospheric flow that actually sustains this giant river, the Amazon. So what you see here is, of course, that the water that actually flows out through the Amazon is actually being provided by the flow in the air, and that this flow in, this river in, is actually even greater than the Amazon. The water continues flowing further south, you can see, and flowing out again. And at the same time, as this moisture is flowing in, of course, it's sustaining high rainfall, and the forest itself is also sustaining high evaporation back. So a lot of the moisture that falls from the atmosphere as rain is actually returned to the atmosphere so that it can fall again in its journey on the land again, and continues. And this isn't just a phenomenon that we see in the Amazon basin, it's actually a global phenomenon. So we see similar flows, not always as big as that over the Amazon, but nonetheless crucial flows of moisture from one part of the earth to others, with moisture providing much needed rainfall in different parts of the world. And I guess a key point to make is that we now know that the rainfall on the land surface, which is about 113,000 cubic kilometers per year, most of this is actually coming from this recycled rain. So it's not a minority, it's not a small fraction, but it's actually the majority. So whereas about 40,000 cubic kilometers of water per year are provided by evaporation from the oceans being blown in over the land surface and falling as rain, the remainder, the 73,000 cubic kilometers, is actually moisture that evaporates off the land surface and returns again as rain somewhere else. And we're able to look at this in more detail because, of course, it's not the same process everywhere. We have flows from and to various parts of the globe. And here's just a summary over several years of data showing with the darker colors, particularly the redder colors, the areas that are particularly important as sources in the top panel and the areas which are particularly dependent in the lower panel on this recycled moisture. So we see here areas that are providing moisture to other parts of the planet, much of Central Asia, Eastern Europe, parts of Africa, particularly Central Africa, and the Amazon basin itself is also a major source of moisture. And what we see in the panel below is those areas that are actually very dependent on such recycled moisture. And what we see here, which I think is important, is incredible populations of people dependent on rain-fed agriculture, such as those farmers that you would find across China, across much of the Sahel in Africa, and much of Central South America. What's the role of forests in all this? Well, with modern data, we know much more about the relationships, and we see quite important correlations, such as, here's just an example from a study I've been involved with myself, where we look at the relationship between forest cover and rainfall across Borneo, and we see that since the early 1970s, when forest cover started to decline quite rapidly in Borneo, we see around a 20% decline in total rainfall across the island. And we see a greater impact in those parts of the island which have lost the most forest. And similar relationships have now been published in various parts of the world. So just in the last year, we see studies from Africa, from South America, and even in Europe, showing a clear relationship between forest cover and rainfall. Where we have more forest, we tend to have more rainfall, and also more reliable rainfall. We also understand better the nature of these relationships. I don't have time to go into all the details, but I guess a key point to make is we now realize that trees are a major source of this recycled rain. In the past, people would have said it was a relatively minor source, and this estimates of how important they are is much greater now, thanks to some recent studies. We also see how important small changes in the amount of moisture going into the atmosphere can be for rainfall locally and elsewhere, and this is because of the very non-linear responses we have in the likelihood and amount of rainfall, how this depends on atmospheric moisture. A small difference in the atmospheric moisture due to either the presence and absence of forests, for example, can have a big impact on the likelihood and quantity of rainfall. So that's something that's very clear. And we're also understanding much better now, both through observations and through theory, how these relationships between forest cover and rainfall are consistently showing behavior which we would call tipping points. This is due to the feedbacks that occur. If we have a wet system, it'll often try and become wetter. The rainfall will increase. If we have a dry system, we'll actually lose tree cover and see feedback where we can actually go drier. We actually see that the system often doesn't like to be somewhere in the middle. It will flicker backwards and forwards and either switch to being wet or dry depending on the conditions. And of course, this is a considerably dangerous situation in some parts of the world if we think that deforestation could actually switch a reasonably wet, productive climate to a dry and unproductive one. So we could see quite dramatic changes in the local climate as a result of deforestation. So the implications of all these studies, I guess, are that we now have a much better idea of the implications of tree cover for the magnitude and reliability of rainfall. And tree cover is super important for much of the rainfall across the planet. There's no doubt about that. We see that forest losses can be catastrophic and much more catastrophic potentially than you might assume because of these non-linear effects, these switching effects. We also see the positive potential, the idea that areas which are now dry, arid, degraded, and unproductive could be made productive, wetter, more humid, and productive again through the transforming power of forest cover. If we can plant trees or get trees to recover in the right way, get forests to come back, we could actually imagine making much of the planet, which is currently relatively unproductive, we could imagine seeing it as productive again. So this is hugely important, and I think we see not just risks, but really big, important opportunities for forests in actually making the world a better and more pleasant place to live.
Thank you. Thank you so much. That was the last of our case studies. And they really showed the many aspects of the work on forest and water connections and the great initiatives that are happening around the world. To continue the discussion, we'd like to suggest another interactive activity to really make people reflect on the role that they can play to improve the integration of water in forest management. So please go on menti.com again if you have left or stay there. You can use the same code as before. We have convened a panel of experts, each representing a different type of stakeholder: government, youth, research, and international organizations. And each panelist will be given a question, but the same or a very similar question will also be posted on menti.com for you, the audience, either in the room or joining us online. So you, the audience, can share your thoughts. And I will invite the panelists to, of course, give their response to the question, but also comment on the inputs that you're giving us through the Mentimeter. So I would like to just remind the panelists that we are over time, so really we need to stick to maximum 3 minutes per intervention. So please keep it short and to the point, but we'll start with someone representing government, Mr. Muhammad Askari, Deputy Director of Peatland Ecosystem Degradation Control Sources from the government of Indonesia. He's joining us online. And the question I would like to ask him, if we can connect to him now, is Mr. Askari, Indonesia is a great example of a country that is taking peatland very seriously. So what are the main success factors, please?
Okay, thank you for time for us. So basically that if we do understand about the peatland, 90% of the peatland consists of water. So that's come to the main issue because there are so many canals, so that if we can bring back the water, so we solve most of the problems. Then the second one is that we have to do the rehabilitation of the vegetation. And then the third one, we have to improve the local community livelihood. This come together will overcome all of the peatland problems. And then, of course, the last one that we cannot leave, that we have to do the the law enforcement. So there are many factors that can be contributing for the restoration of the ecosystem in Indonesia. So that's come to our priority: restore the water, restore the vegetation, improve the community livelihood. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Scary. Oh, I'm glad we can see you now. Thank you for these great points. May I please ask to see the Mentimeter answers as well? So maybe not for this speaker, but for the next one, so we can see the Mentimeter answers at the same time as we hear from the panelists. And the next panelist has been with us all along, so and very patient, and she's representing youth. We're very lucky to have her, Ms. Sujin Lee, International Forestry Student Association, World Forestry Congress Task Force and Delegation. So Ms. Lee, tell us what factors are important to engage youth in the forest-water interface, please?
Yeah. There's a lot of option, but I think first step is education, because it's a basic step to engage the youth. And basic initiative is the most important because it's the first step to start something. However, we don't have much opportunity to learn and get knowledge about the forest-water interface. We need more education about forest-water interface. For example, especially my case, we have some soil taxonomy, forest engineering, forest policies, and silviculture, a kind of that minor subject about in my universities, but there's no water. There's no forest-to-water interface. So I heard the other countries also don't have this kind of minor subject about a forest-water interface. So it's a big international problem. Water cycle and plant cycle are similar, so we must know both how water and forestry management work. When we plant, grow up, and nourish the trees, water is essential. So we cannot talk without water. We don't concentrate enough on water. So we have to do a lot of interdisciplinary research in university. That's my solution.
Thank you so much. Oh, sorry. Yes.
Yeah. And keep going. Just 30 seconds.
Just 1 minute. Yeah. Please.
Yeah, sure. And if it already had an enough education course, then I think the next step is internship and training opportunities. Both forest and water take so long time to get some results. So if it already has a good education and course, then I think the next step is internship and training opportunities. We need to provide it to the youth. Youth organization like IPSA provides internship opportunities, but we need more connections for a greater research, greater reach in the field of forest-water interface. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Yeah, really great points and very eloquently made. So I would like to move to the next panelist who represents research or scientific community. Dr. Hall, we saw him briefly earlier. May I just ask the technicians to show as well the Mentimeter result at the same time, so Dr. Hall can answer our question, but also reflect on inputs from the audience. So the question is, what are the major barriers to increase protection and restoration of key ecosystems in the forest-water interface?
Well, again, thanks for having me. I think that there's typically three major barriers that have been identified. One would be knowledge and information, another would be finance, and another would be governance. And of course, being a scientist, I would always have to say, well, we need more money for research, for knowledge. But in fact, we know a lot. And we heard that in our first keynote speaker from that we've known a lot for a long time. In the tropics, we know that forests can enhance groundwater infiltration, can enhance dry season stream flow. We know that forests can mitigate peak flooding. And so this has been published on, but as has been noted, they use water, and there's a trade-off between total water yield and regulating stream flows. What hasn't been talked about so much in this conference, this presentation, is waters also can help filter water, or forests can, in terms of forest buffers. And so in a mixed landscape, including forest buffers is both important and effective. Forests then, incorporating them in landscape seems from all of this to be a no-brainer, but the key is, of course, then to be smart about our reforestation. And of course, there is more to be known about reforesting and the interactions therein. But I would just really want to say that lack of knowledge is no excuse for inaction. In terms of finance, there are creative mechanisms out there from the watershed level of connecting downstream users to upstream land managers, through finance, through actual direct action, and this is important. I'm sure many other people would give better answers about the lack of knowledge of what we need to know about in terms of financial mechanisms, but I'm sure there are solutions out there. And governance, one of the big challenges, unfortunately, is the rule of law. If people are asked to make changes, if they don't have confidence in their government to actually maintain their commitments for the next 20 or 30 years for the land use that they'll change is kind of important. And land tenure being an issue in the tropics where people often don't have clear land title. And so they're encouraged to deforest to show their use rights. So we have to find creative governance solutions that allow people to show their use rights through maintaining forests, and that can be through maybe registered forest management plans. And so any one of our incredible panelists could give, I'm sure, an eloquent answer about this question, but that's what you get from me, and thank you again so much for allowing me to participate.
Thank you so much. All right, yeah, and then our last panelist, representing international organizations, is Dr. Amy Duchel with No, Cecile is coming later. And so Amy, how do we scale up and accelerate forest water action, please?
I mean, just one very short point. We have a huge opportunity with the upcoming UNFCCC COP27, which will be held in Egypt, where water is a major priority area, of course, because it's a major issue for the country, for the region, the African continent. And so we can really leverage that opportunity to highlight the entry point as water for forest-based climate action, as opposed to the carbon entry point that's been used for so many years. And this can then be operationalized in the nationally determined contributions to the Paris Agreement, as well as the national adaptation planning process for countries, where those are cross-sectoral by nature and really can bring in the forest-water connections in the climate space. Thanks.
Thank you, Amy. Great point. And that concludes our short but, very interesting panel. And we hope that this panel and also the case studies have really demonstrated that forest-water connections go well beyond the role of forest and trees in hydrological cycle, and that we can all play a role in accelerating forest-water action. And now, the final speaker of this session. It is my great pleasure to welcome to the stage Ms. Cecile Djebet, founder and president of the African Women's Network for Community Management of Forests. Cecile is here to share with us a call to action on how we can work together across sectors to ensure that the forest-water nexus is included in policy and management strategies.
Thank you. The call for action. The water-related services that forests and trees provide as part of forests, water, climate, people, system are complex and site-specific. We need to develop management approaches and policies that maximize benefit for people and the planet, while taking into account any trade-offs. This is not easy undertaking, and major knowledge gaps exist. However, increased research and lessons from the field, as well as advancement in Earth observation, monitoring tools, and citizen science approaches are paving the way for increased action when it comes to improving management of our forests and water resources and including them in policy. Furthermore, initiatives and policy frameworks such as the UN Decade on Ecosystem Restoration, the Bond Challenge, the Post-2020 Biodiversity Framework, the Paris Agreement on Climate Change, and the SDGs provide platforms for advocating for the forest, water, climate, people system, and ensuring the forest-water nexus is included in policies and management strategies. To achieve this, the organizer called for action 1. 2. Ensure ecosystem restoration approaches that consider forest, water, climate, people, relationship, and the multiple water-related services that forests and trees provide to achieve the SDGs. When we are talking about people here, please make sure we are talking about men and women. 2. Integrate forest water management in broader landscape approaches that acknowledge the human and climate dimensions, the multifunctionality, trade-off, and plural values and objectives. 3. To strengthen and develop policies that take into account the forest-water nexus and the water-related services that forests and trees provide to humans, especially in the context of climate change. Always taking into account that women are more vulnerable to climate change. 4. Foster collaboration and integration between sectors for climate-resilient economies and communities that acknowledge the forest, water, climate, people system. 5. To increase and promote communications, conservations, research, lesson from action on the ground, and monitoring approaches that include citizen science to fill in knowledge gaps and to support better decision in management and policy making. 6. To develop or adapt restoration targets and initiatives so that they go beyond biophysical aspect to include socio-economic aspect to better conceptualize forest-water relationship. And here we always stress on restoration going with livelihood development of the people. And 7, promote spring-shade management to implement programs on freshwater ecosystem, including cryosphere, watershed, and spring-shade adopting river basin management and transboundary scale. This is the call for action, and please make sure we not only hear it, but also we take action now because we are getting very late. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you, Cecile. our session is coming to a close. We hope you enjoyed it and it inspired you to take action, indeed, like Cecile said, to promote forest-water connections. If you have not got it, you can find the session brief online on the World Forestry Congress website and also the FAO Forest Water Champions website, where we will also post the answers to all the questions and comments that were made by the audience online and in the room through the Mentimeter. So many thanks again to all our great speakers, including those who woke up very early or stayed up very late to join us. We couldn't have done it without you. Thank you to our audience. Thank you so much. Have a great day and have a great World Forestry Congress, everyone.